Welcome, this is Sonia. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Houston, Texas, there lived a young woman named Rosa. She worked as a maid for one of the wealthiest men in the city, a man named Marcus Calloway. Marcus was the owner of a large oil business, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. He had everything a man could want: money, power, and influence. Yet, despite all his success, he lived a fast-paced, lonely life. Rosa had been working in Marcus's mansion for almost 2 years. She was diligent, quiet, and careful never to be in anyone's way. She would spend her days cleaning the large rooms, dusting the antique furniture, and preparing meals when the chef was unavailable. Marcus barely noticed her, as he was often too preoccupied with meetings and business trips. But every once in a while, when he was home, their paths would cross, and for some reason, those brief encounters had always left a mark on Rosa. Marcus, though aloof and reserved, was not unkind. In fact, there were moments when he would ask Rosa how she was doing or make a simple joke to lighten the mood. He was charming in his own way, and Rosa couldn't help but be drawn to him. But she kept her feelings hidden, knowing her place as just the maid. One evening, after a long day, Marcus came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, with most of the staff having left for the day. Only Rosa remained, tidying up the dining room. Marcus walked in, looking tired but still managing a smile when he saw her. "Long day?" he asked casually. "Yes, sir," Rosa replied, keeping her eyes lowered. "But nothing I can't handle." Marcus paused for a moment, leaning against the dining table. "You work harder than anyone here," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected warmth. "I hope you know that." Rosa was taken aback by the compliment. "Thank you, sir." Their conversation was brief, but something about that night changed the dynamic between them. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began to notice Rosa more. He would catch her in quiet moments, watching her move gracefully around the house, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. Rosa, in turn, couldn't ignore the growing attraction she felt for him, no matter how much she tried to suppress it. Then, one evening, after a particularly long and stressful day for Marcus, he found himself alone in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand. Rosa had just finished cleaning the adjacent library and was preparing to leave for the night when Marcus called her in. "Rosa," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "sit with me for a moment." She hesitated but obeyed, sitting on the edge of a plush armchair across from him. The room was dimly lit, the only sound being the crackle of the fireplace and the occasional clink of Marcus's glass as he sipped his drink. "I don't know how you do it," he said, staring into the flames. "Every day, you're here, always working, always patient. I envy that." Rosa didn't know how to respond. She had never seen him so vulnerable before. "You make it sound like I'm doing something extraordinary," she replied quietly. "But I'm just doing my job." Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You're more than just a maid, Rosa." Before she could respond, the distance between them dissolved, and in that moment, something happened between them that neither had planned for. A kiss turned into something more, and for one night, Rosa felt like she belonged in his world. But that night was the beginning of something she never could have anticipated. Weeks passed, and Rosa discovered she was pregnant. Panic set in. She knew she couldn't stay at the mansion, working under Marcus's nose, without him eventually finding out. So, without a word, she left. She quit her job and disappeared from Marcus's life, keeping her secret hidden. As the months went by, Rosa gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, whom she named Daniel. Raising him on her own was difficult, and with each passing year, life became harder. Rosa sank into a deep depression, unable to reconcile her current reality with the life she once had. Her son was her only source of light, but even he couldn't pull her out of the darkness that had settled over her. By the time Daniel turned 8, they had hit rock bottom. Rosa had no stable job, no support, and no choice but to rely on the charity of strangers. Every day, after school, Daniel would join his mother at a busy intersection, where they would stand by the traffic light and ask passing drivers for money. Daniel was a quiet boy, wise beyond his years. He didn't complain about their circumstances or question why they had to stand by the roadside every day. He only wanted to help his mother. And so, each afternoon, he would take his place by her side, holding a small sign while Rosa stood a few feet away, her head down, ashamed of what her life had become. Every now and then, Daniel would see a sleek, black car pull up to the light. It was a luxury car, the kind he had only seen in movies, and it always caught his eye. The driver, a well-dressed man in his 40s, would often glance over at them with an unreadable expression before driving off as the light turned green. Daniel didn't know it, but the man in that car was his father. Days turned into weeks, and each afternoon Daniel stood by the traffic light with his mother, holding his sign, eyes scanning the passing cars for any bit of kindness. He noticed how drivers reacted. Some looked away, embarrassed, while others offered a sympathetic smile or rolled down their windows to give him a few coins. But there was always one car that stood out to him, the sleek, black luxury car with the man in the tailored suit behind the wheel. At a T first, the man would only glance in their direction, a fleeting look that seemed to pass over them like any other stranger. But after a while, something changed. One afternoon, as Daniel stood by the light, the black car slowed to a stop right in front of him. The window rolled down, and the man extended his hand, offering Daniel a few crisp dollar bills. "Here, kid," the man said with a smile, his voice warm but distant, as though he was speaking to someone he barely noticed. Daniel, grateful, took the money, nodding his thanks without a word. From that day on, the man in the black car started giving Daniel money each time he saw him at the traffic light. Sometimes it was a few dollars, sometimes a little more. The man never said much, just a quick "take care" or "stay safe" before driving off. But Daniel always remembered his kindness. Rosa, however, noticed too. At first, she felt relieved that someone was helping them, even if it was just small amounts of cash. But one afternoon, while standing a few feet away from her son, she saw the man lean out of the car, handing Daniel more money. As their eyes met, something inside Rosa broke. It was Marcus, the father of her child. Her heart raced, panic surging through her. He didn't recognize her, of course, how could he, after so many years? But the idea that he was so close to their son, unknowingly handing money to his own flesh and blood, sent waves of fear and dread through her. What if he found out? What if he took Daniel from her? The law was on his side. He had money, power, and influence. And she had nothing. At that moment, Rosa knew she couldn't risk it. That night, as Daniel slept beside her in their cramped one-bedroom apartment, Rosa lay awake, her mind racing. She had to keep her son safe. She couldn't let Marcus find out the truth. He would never let her keep Daniel, and Rosa had already lost too much to lose her only child. The decision weighed heavily on her, but she knew what she had to do. The very next day, Rosa packed up their few belongings and moved them to another part of the city. She found a different traffic light, far away from the one they had been standing at for weeks. It wasn't ideal. This new intersection didn't have as much traffic, and the drivers were less generous, but Rosa felt a small sense of relief knowing they were out of Marcus's reach. For a while, things went back to their routine. Daniel went to school in the mornings and helped his mother at the traffic light in the afternoons. Rosa felt safer, even if they were struggling more than ever. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One day, as Daniel stood by the new traffic light, holding his sign like he always did, a familiar black car came to a stop in front of him. Rosa's heart dropped into her stomach when she saw it. It was Marcus's car again. She watched from a distance, frozen in place, as Marcus rolled down his window. This time, instead of handing Daniel some money right away, he hesitated, staring at the boy for a moment longer than usual. "You know," Marcus said, his brow furrowed, "you look like someone I know. I just can't remember who." Daniel tilted his head, confused, but didn't say anything. He took the money Marcus offered and quickly stepped back onto the sidewalk. Rosa, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, felt a wave of panic wash over her again. That night, Rosa could barely sleep. Marcus was starting to notice. How long until he figured out the truth? She felt trapped. No matter where they moved, Marcus kept crossing their path. It was as if fate was determined to bring them together, and no matter how far she tried to run, the past was catching up to her. Rosa knew it was only a matter of time before Marcus would start asking more questions, and when he did, she wasn't sure she'd have the strength to keep the truth hidden. The next day, Marcus returned to the same traffic light. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about the boy seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. As he handed Daniel more money, his gaze drifted toward the woman standing a few feet away. She looked tired, worn, and different, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her too. It was Rosa. Though time had taken its toll on her, her once vibrant face now etched with lines of hardship and exhaustion, Marcus felt a strange pull. He didn't fully recognize her, but something nagged at the back of his mind. The woman looked like someone he had known, perhaps from long ago. Unsure, he started returning every day, lingering a little longer each time, hoping to figure out why she seemed so familiar each day. Marcus found himself driving back to that same traffic light. It was strange, even to him, why he kept returning. A part of him told himself it was to help the boy, to give a little money to someone who clearly needed it. But deep down, it was more than that. Every time he saw the woman standing nearby, something in his gut told him he knew her. But her face, it had changed. The years had been hard on her, and she no longer had the same brightness in her eyes or the youthful energy she once carried. Still, there was something there, just beneath the surface, that tugged at his memory. Marcus couldn't figure it out, but that didn't stop him from coming back. Sometimes he'd sit at the traffic light even when it was green, letting the cars behind him honk impatiently, just to get another glimpse of her. He watched her from the corner of his eye, searching for clues, hoping for something to spark a memory. Rosa noticed him too, her fear growing with each passing day. She could feel Marcus's gaze on her more often now, lingering for longer periods. Every time he handed Daniel money, she held her breath, hoping he wouldn't connect the dots, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. She would turn away, avoiding his eyes, pretending not to notice. But Marcus wasn't giving up. He felt a gnawing sense of unfinished business, as if he had forgotten something important, something about this woman and her son. And each time he returned to that intersection, his curiosity deepened, his desire to uncover the truth stronger than before. One day, as Marcus sat at the traffic light, staring at Rosa and Daniel, he made a decision. The curiosity was gnawing at him, and the vague familiarity of her face was driving him to the point of distraction. He couldn't take it anymore, he had to talk to her, had to know why she seemed so familiar. The light turned red, and Marcus shifted the car into park. He glanced at Daniel, who was standing on the sidewalk holding his usual sign, then at Rosa, who was avoiding eye contact as she always did. Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened his car door, stepping out onto the pavement. The moment Rosa saw him get out of the car, her heart dropped into her stomach. Panic flooded her mind, and instinctively, she grabbed Daniel's hand. "Mom, what's wrong?" Daniel asked, confused as his mother's grip tightened on his small hand. But Rosa didn't answer. She couldn't let Marcus get close to her, couldn't risk him recognizing her face, even if time had been cruel. She couldn't let him know the truth, that this boy, her son, was also his. Her entire body screamed to run, to protect her son from the man who could take him away. Without thinking, She yanked Daniel's arm and started running. Marcus froze, standing halfway out of his car, watching in confusion as Rosa, clutching her son, bolted across the street. "Wait," he shouted after her, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of cars honking as she darted between them. Rosa didn't look back, her heart pounding in her chest, tears welling up in her eyes as she ran with everything she had. She didn't stop until they reached a side street, far enough from the traffic light. They hid behind a building, breathless, with Rosa's heart racing as if it were about to burst out of her chest. "Mom, why are we running?" Daniel asked, wide-eyed and confused, pulling on her sleeve. Rosa bent down to his level, trying to catch her breath, the weight of her fear pressing down on her. She wiped the tears from her eyes and forced a smile. We need to be careful, Daniel. We can't trust everyone." Daniel looked at her, not fully understanding, but he didn't push further. He trusted his mother. Meanwhile, Marcus stood there by his car, staring at the spot where they had just been. Confusion turned to frustration as he got back into his car. He was more determined than ever to figure out who that woman was and why she ran from him. The next day, he would come back again. The next day, Marcus drove to the traffic light with a sense of determination. His mind had been racing since the previous day, replaying the moment when Rosa, he was almost certain it was her, had run away with the boy. Something didn't sit right. The way she fled, the look in her eyes, and that boy. Why did he feel such a strong connection to the child? When Marcus arrived at the traffic light, he expected to see Daniel standing in his usual spot, holding his sign. But instead, there was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with big, curious eyes and a shy smile. Marcus felt a pang of disappointment. Where was Daniel? He rolled down the window and waved the girl over. She cautiously approached the car. "Hey," Marcus began, trying to keep his voice gentle. "Do you know the boy who's usually here? His name is Daniel." The little girl nodded. "Yes, I know him. But he's not here today." Marcus frowned, feeling a strange sense of urgency building inside him. "Is he coming back? Will I see him tomorrow?" The girl hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, he won't be coming back. His mom said they have to go somewhere else." Marcus's heart sank. The more he heard, the more desperate he felt. He leaned closer, his voice quieter but intense. "Do you know Daniel's mom? Do you know her name?" The little girl paused, looking at Marcus with innocent curiosity, and then said, "Her name is Rosa." Time seemed to stop for Marcus. Rosa. The name hit him like a bolt of lightning. His pulse quickened, his mind racing back to the memories he thought he had buried. Rosa, the woman who had worked in his home, who had quietly slipped into his life and, just as quietly, disappeared without a trace. He had loved her in a way he hadn't loved anyone else, even if he had never admitted it out loud. When she vanished, he had searched for her, asked around, but no one knew where she had gone. He had been heartbroken for months, wondering why she left, what had happened. And now, after all these years, she was right here, standing at the traffic light, with a child, a boy who, Marcus now realized with a sudden, terrifying certainty, was his son. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as the revelation crashed over him. The little girl stared at him, unaware of the storm that had erupted inside his mind. He was reeling, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, confusion, and something else, a deep, aching sadness. "Rosa," he whispered to himself, shaking his head as if trying to make sense of it all. He felt like he was going crazy. How could she have kept this from him? How could she have left without telling him she was pregnant? And why had she been living like this, asking for money at traffic lights with their son? Marcus looked at the girl, forcing himself to speak. "Do you know where they went?" The girl shook her head, and Marcus's heart sank even further. She had slipped through his fingers again, just like all those years ago. But this time, he wouldn't let her disappear so easily. Not now. Not after knowing that Daniel was his. As he drove away from the traffic light, his mind was already racing with plans. He had to find Rosa, and he had to find Daniel. He had questions, and they needed answers. That night, Marcus went home, but sleep was impossible. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of questions and emotions he had buried for years. Is he my son? The thought raced through his head, refusing to settle. The timeline lined up too perfectly. Rosa had left his house about 8 years ago, without explanation, without a goodbye. And that boy, Daniel, looked to be about the same age. Was she pregnant with my son? The question gnawed at him, making his chest tighten. He replayed the last few months Rosa had worked for him, the small moments they had shared. He had never asked her about her past, about other men. But now, thinking back, he remembered that Rosa had been a virgin. He had been her first, and that made the realization hit even harder. It has to be my son. How could she keep this from me? Marcus sat up in bed, rubbing his hands over his face, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Why did she leave? That question had haunted him for years. When she disappeared, he had tried to convince himself that maybe it wasn't meant to be, that maybe it was just a brief affair in her eyes. But deep down, he had always known that Rosa was different. She wasn't like the other women who had come and gone in his life. She had a quiet strength, a warmth that no one else could match. He hadn't just liked her, he had loved her. And he never found anyone like her after she left. I should have told her I was in love with her. Marcus shook his head, feeling a mix of regret and frustration building up inside him. Maybe she left because she thought I didn't want her, because I have money, because I didn't say what I was feeling. But that wasn't true. He had wanted her more than anything. He had just never known how to say it. And now, 8 years later, he was still in love with her. No woman had ever come close to Rosa. No matter how many dates he went on or how many relationships he tried to start, they always fell short. They weren't her. But now, after all these years, the one woman he had never stopped thinking about was living on the streets with their son. How could she do this to me? The betrayal stung, but more than anything, Marcus was confused. He didn't believe Rosa had left out of malice, she wasn't like that. There had to be another reason. But what was it? Why had she kept his son a secret? Why hadn't she asked for help? We didn't have closure, Marcus thought bitterly. I never got the chance to tell her how I really felt. And now? He sighed, feeling the ache of years of silence between them. There were too many questions, and not a single answer in sight. He got up, pacing around his room, his heart heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. I need to find her, he thought, his jaw tightening with determination. I need to know the truth. And more than that, he needed to see his son. After that sleepless night, Marcus knew what he had to do. If Rosa had truly been hiding from him all these years with his son, he wasn't going to let her slip away again. But he had to be smart about it. Showing up in the same car every day had made him too easy to spot. She'd run once, and he couldn't risk that happening again. So Marcus changed tactics. He swapped out his flashy black car for something more low-key, a simple sedan that blended in with the rest of the traffic. He started going by the different traffic lights at various times, hoping to catch a glimpse of them again, but each time he came up empty-handed. Days turned into a week, and his frustration grew. He had no way of knowing where Rosa had gone, and the city felt impossibly large. He needed help. It was then that Marcus hired a private investigator. The man was thorough, asking all the right questions, tracking every possible lead. It took days of relentless searching, but finally, the investigator called with the information Marcus had been waiting for. Rosa and Daniel had moved to a rundown apartment on the other side of town, far from where they used to stand at the traffic light. Marcus's heart raced when he heard the news, torn between relief and the anxiety of what came next. That night, he drove to the address the investigator had given him. His palms were sweating as he gripped the steering wheel, the reality of the moment finally sinking in. He was going to see Rosa again after all these years. And his son was going to be there too. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. The street was quiet, dimly lit by a few flickering streetlights. Marcus parked a little way down the block and walked slowly toward the apartment. His heart pounded with every step, a mix of nerves and anticipation twisting inside him. When he finally reached the door, he hesitated for a long moment before knocking. Inside, Rosa was cleaning up after dinner when she heard the knock. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her heart immediately jumped in her chest. With caution, she approached the door and peeked through the peephole. The moment she saw who it was, she nearly collapsed. It was Marcus. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a second, the world seemed to spin around her. She hadn't seen him in so long, and yet there he was, standing on her doorstep. She clutched her chest, trying to steady her breathing, panic flooding her system. She knew this day might come, but she had never truly prepared herself for it. "Mom, who's at the door?" Daniel asked, walking up behind her. He peered through the crack she had left in the door, his eyes widening when he saw Marcus. "I know him," Daniel said softly. "That's the man from the traffic light." Rosa knew she couldn't avoid it any longer. With trembling hands, she opened the door. Marcus's eyes immediately locked onto hers, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. It was as if time stood still between them. Rosa looked different now, older, more tired, but her face still held that same beauty that had captivated him all those years ago. "Rosa," he breathed, his voice filled with emotions he couldn't even name. Rosa didn't respond at first. Her instinct was to shut the door, to hide, to run like she had before. But something in Marcus's eyes made her pause. He wasn't angry, he wasn't accusing, he was searching for answers, just like she had been all these years. Daniel stepped forward, staring at Marcus with wide eyes. "You're him, aren't you? The man who gives me money at the light." Marcus swallowed hard, looking down at the boy. There was no denying it, the resemblance was too strong. This was his son. His heart ached at the realization. "I am," Marcus replied softly. "And I think I'm more than that." Rosa's chest tightened. "What do you want, Marcus?" Her voice was shaky, defensive. She had built so many walls around her heart, afraid of what would happen if she let him in. "I want to talk," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "I want to understand. Why did you leave? Why didn't you tell me?" At first, Rosa resisted. She wanted nothing to do with him. She couldn't bear the thought of him turning her life upside down. She was scared that he would take Daniel away, scared that he would accuse her of wanting his money, scared that he would never forgive her for disappearing. She didn't trust him with her heart, and more importantly, she didn't trust him with her son. But Marcus was patient. He didn't push her, didn't demand anything from her. Instead, he listened. Slowly, Rosa began to open up, the walls she had built around herself starting to crumble. "I left because I was pregnant, Marcus," she said, her voice breaking as she finally confessed. "I didn't tell you because I was scared. I thought you'd think I was just after your money. And I was terrified you'd take Daniel from me. I couldn't risk losing him." Marcus's heart broke hearing her say those words. He stepped closer, his voice soft and full of regret. "Rosa, I would never have done that. I loved you. I never stopped." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't love me. You never said anything. How was I supposed to know? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, guilt gnawing at him. I should have told you. I should have said something. I thought you left because you didn't want me, because you thought you didn't belong in my world. But I never stopped loving you, Rosa. Not for a single day. Rosa and Daniel had been found. They were living in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the areas Marcus had been searching. The news hit him hard, knowing that they had been so close all this time, living in such poor conditions, made his heart ache. He wasted no time. That night, he drove to the apartment, heart racing, unsure of what would happen but determined to see them. As he pulled up in the dark, the building looked worn, tired, much like how Rosa had appeared the last time he saw her. Marcus took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked to their door. He hesitated for a moment before knocking, his pulse pounding in his ears. When the door opened, it wasn't Daniel who greeted him, it was Rosa. The moment she saw Marcus standing there, she gasped, her face going pale as though she had seen a ghost. Marcus, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She clutched her chest, her legs trembling as if they might give out. The shock was too much for her to handle, and for a second, she looked like she might collapse. At that moment, Daniel appeared behind her, his young face lighting up with recognition. "It's the man from the car," he exclaimed, looking between Marcus and his mother with wide eyes. He didn't understand everything that was happening, but something in him seemed to connect the dots. Marcus stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "Rosa, I'm not here to hurt you. I need to talk. Please." Rosa hesitated, fear and anger flickering across her face. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Why couldn't you just leave us alone?" "I couldn't," Marcus replied, his eyes locked on hers. "I couldn't just walk away. I know, Rosa. I know about Daniel." Rosa's face hardened, and for a moment, it looked like she might slam the door in his face. "It doesn't matter now. It's too late. We've been fine on our own." Marcus's voice grew softer, more pleading. "Rosa, please. I don't know why you left or why you didn't tell me, but I need to know. I need to understand." He glanced at Daniel, who was now watching the exchange quietly, sensing the tension. "He's my son, isn't he?" For a long moment, Rosa said nothing. She stood there, holding the door, torn between her fear of losing Daniel and the weight of the truth. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes," she whispered. "He's your son." The confirmation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut, but at the same time, a sense of relief washed over him. I knew it, he thought. But his relief quickly turned to sadness as he saw the pain in Rosa's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked softly. "Why did you leave?" Rosa's hands shook as she spoke, her voice breaking. "I was scared, Marcus. You have money, power, everything. I didn't want you to think I got pregnant to take advantage of you. And I was terrified you'd take him away from me. I couldn't risk losing him." Marcus shook his head. "I would never have done that, Rosa. I loved you." His voice cracked, the weight of everything unsaid over the years pressing down on him. "I should have told you back then, but I never found anyone like you. I'm still in love with you." Tears welled up in Rosa's eyes as she looked away, fighting back her emotions. "I didn't know that. I thought you'd move on and forget about me. And when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I thought it was best if I disappeared." Marcus stepped closer, his voice softening even more. "You don't have to run anymore. I'm not here to take Daniel away from you. I just want to be in his life, and yours, if you'll let me." Rosa hesitated again, her guard still up. "I can't just pretend like everything's okay. It's been years, Marcus." "I know," Marcus said. "I know we have a lot to work through. But please, promise me one thing: you won't disappear again. Don't shut me out this time." Rosa looked at him, the battle between her fear and her lingering feelings for him written all over her face. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I promise I won't disappear." Though her words were soft, they held the weight of years of unspoken hurt, regret, and hope. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like they had a chance to make things right. After Marcus left that night, Rosa sat down on the worn-out couch, feeling drained and overwhelmed. She stared at the floor, lost in thought, when Daniel approached her cautiously, his young face full of curiosity and confusion. "Mom," Daniel asked, his voice soft but insistent. "Did he say I'm his son?" Rosa's chest tightened as tears welled up in her eyes, the weight of years of secrets pressing down on her. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that one day she would have to tell Daniel the truth. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. Finally, through her sobs, she nodded. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered. "He's your father." Daniel stood there for a moment, absorbing the revelation. It was something he had longed to know for as long as he could remember. "How come you never told him or me, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I've asked you so many times who my father was, and you never told me." Rosa wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her heart aching at the confusion in her son's voice. "It's complicated, Daniel," she said, trying to find the right words. "But I'm smart," Daniel insisted, stepping closer to her. "I'll understand, Mom. Please, tell me." Rosa took a deep breath, knowing she couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. She sat Daniel down next to her on the couch, her heart heavy as she began to explain. "Before you were born," Rosa began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I worked in Marcus's house. I wasn't just his maid. I cared for him, and I thought he cared for me too. But I didn't think he felt the same way I did. When I found out I was pregnant, I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I told him, he'd think I was after his money or that he'd take you away from me because of how powerful he is." Daniel listened closely, his eyes wide as he tried to understand everything his mother was telling him. "So, you just left?" he asked, his voice small. Rosa nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I left before he could ever find out. I didn't want to risk losing you, Daniel. You're all I have." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing everything. "But, he's my dad," he finally said, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and confusion. "He should have known." Rosa hugged him tightly, her heart breaking for the pain she had caused. "I know, baby. I should have told him. And I should have told you too. I was just so afraid." 2 days later, Marcus returned. Rosa had been dreading this moment, but she knew it was inevitable. This time, Marcus came with more than just a conversation, he had a plan. When he knocked on the door, Daniel ran to open it, his eyes lighting up as soon as he saw his father. Marcus gave him a warm smile and stepped inside, his gaze soft as it landed on Rosa. She stood there, still feeling vulnerable, but there was a quiet acceptance in her eyes. "I've thought about this a lot," Marcus began, looking from Rosa to Daniel. "I don't want to force anything, but I can't just walk away from this. I want you both in my life. And I want you to come stay with me, at my house." Rosa's heart pounded in her chest. She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, Daniel looked up at her, his voice pleading. "Mom, please. Can we go? I want to be with him." Rosa looked down at her son, seeing the hope and excitement in his eyes. It was clear that Daniel had already begun to feel the connection with Marcus, and for a moment, Rosa was torn. She had spent years protecting him, keeping him safe in her own way. But now Daniel was asking for something she had never given him: a chance to know his father. Marcus stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to bring anything. Just get your documents, Daniel's too. Leave everything else behind. You and Daniel will have the life you both deserve." Rosa hesitated, her mind racing. She had spent so long being afraid of this very moment, afraid of what it would mean to let Marcus back into their lives. But looking at Daniel's hopeful face and hearing the sincerity in Marcus's voice, she realized it was time to stop running. With a deep breath, she finally nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll go." Marcus's face softened with relief, and Daniel's eyes sparkled with excitement. As they gathered their few belongings and stepped out of the small apartment, Rosa couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and hope. She was stepping into the unknown, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't doing it alone. They drove to Marcus's house in silence, the weight of the moment hanging over them. When they arrived, Marcus opened the door to his home, welcoming Rosa and Daniel into a life they had never known, a life filled with possibilities. Rosa still had questions, still had fears, but as she looked at Marcus and saw the determination in his eyes, she knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that she and Daniel had never expected, but maybe, just maybe, one they deserved. The next morning, Marcus wasted no time. He wanted to make sure that both Rosa and Daniel were well taken care of, so he arranged for a full health checkup for them. They drove to one of the top doctors in the city, where Rosa and Daniel underwent thorough examinations. Marcus watched closely, ensuring they had the best care. The doctor reassured Marcus that they were both in good health, though Rosa looked as if she hadn't taken care of herself in years. Marcus made a silent promise to change that. After the doctor's appointment, Marcus took them shopping at the finest stores in town. Daniel, wide-eyed with excitement, tried on clothes he had never dreamed of owning. Rosa, though hesitant at first, slowly embraced the experience as she watched Marcus patiently help Daniel pick out outfits, his face beaming with love for the boy. Marcus made sure Rosa had her pick of elegant dresses, casual clothes, and everything in between. He wanted her to feel beautiful again, to see herself the way he saw her. But Marcus wasn't finished. He wanted Rosa and Daniel to experience the kind of luxury they deserved. They spent the rest of the day at the best spa in town. Rosa had the full treatment, her hair styled, skin pampered, and a full body massage to melt away the years of stress she had carried. Daniel, to his delight, enjoyed a day of fun and relaxation as well, feeling like a prince as the staff treated him like royalty. For the first time in years, Rosa felt like herself again, more radiant than ever. Marcus wasn't stopping there. He took them to the dentist to ensure their smiles were as bright as their future. Rosa protested at first, but Marcus insisted. Everything had to be perfect. And it was. By the time they left the dentist's office, Rosa had regained her confidence, and Daniel beamed with his new, perfect smile. Marcus's next priority was Daniel's education. He enrolled him in one of the top schools in the city, a place that provided the best education and opportunities. But to help Daniel catch up to the level of his new classmates, Marcus also hired a private tutor to work with him at home. Daniel took to the new challenges with ease, his sharp mind and eagerness to learn making the transition smoother than anyone expected. Marcus and Daniel grew closer each day, their bond deepening into something pure and unshakable. Daniel, without hesitation, began calling Marcus Dad, a title that filled Marcus's heart with pride. Months passed, and Rosa flourished. Her days were filled with trips to the spa, visits to the salon, and afternoons at the gym. Marcus had hired a maid, an older, kind woman, so Rosa didn't have to lift a finger at home. She was driving her own car, living the life she had never imagined. Daniel continued to excel at school, proving to be as smart and capable as Marcus had always believed he would be. Their little family felt complete, and everything seemed perfect. One evening, as Marcus returned home from work, he had a surprise for Rosa and Daniel. "We're going to Italy," he announced with a smile. Daniel had just finished his school exams and was on break, so the timing was perfect. Rosa, though surprised, smiled, thrilled at the idea of a vacation. Little did she know, Marcus had much bigger plans in mind. Behind the scenes, Marcus had been working tirelessly with his secretary and legal team to plan something special. He intended to marry Rosa in Italy, and every detail was already set. His secretary had arranged for 3 high-end bridal stores for Rosa to choose her dress from, and a beautiful venue had been selected for the ceremony. Marcus had even invited his closest friends to be there for the big day. He had done everything without Rosa knowing, all with the help of his team, and everything was ready to go. Rosa would have 5 days to choose her dress once they arrived in Italy. In her mind, it was just another beautiful trip, a chance to explore a new country with Daniel and Marcus. But for Marcus, it was the moment he had waited for, the moment when he could finally make Rosa his wife. Rosa was everything Marcus had ever wanted. Their relationship had blossomed naturally, and they complemented each other in ways that neither had expected. Daniel's love for Marcus was genuine, and their family had become inseparable. As they prepared for their trip to Italy, Marcus couldn't help but smile. Everything had fallen into place perfectly. Soon, they would not only be a family by heart but also by name. The stage was set for a beautiful future, and Rosa had no idea the life-changing surprise that awaited her. In just a few days, she would be walking down the aisle in the most beautiful dress, becoming the wife Marcus had always dreamed of. And together, they would begin the next chapter of their lives, a chapter filled with love, family, and happiness that they all deserved. After hearing Rosa's story, what do you think? Would you have done the same thing in her situation, keeping the secret to protect your child? Or would you have chosen a different path? Let me know in the comments below what you would have done differently. Thanks for watching.